The sun was shining bright over the city of Los Angeles, bouncing off the glass windows of the tallest building on the block. This was the Aurora Tower. It wasn't just a building. It was a statement. Inside, the floors were so shiny you could see your reflection in them. The air smelled like expensive flowers and fresh coffee. This was a place for people who had millions of dollars in the bank. A place where important decisions were made that could change the world on this particular morning. The main doors slid open and a man walked in who looked like he owned the entire city. We will call him the CEO. He was wearing a suit that looked like it was made of pure silver and silk, tailored perfectly to fit his broad shoulders. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, clicking loudly on the marble floor with every step he took. He held his head high, looking straight ahead, not making eye contact with anyone. In one hand, he gripped a leather briefcase, and in the other, he held a smartphone, shouting into it. "I told you I want the numbers on my desk in an hour," he yelled, his voice echoing through the huge lobby. "I don't care about excuses. Just get it done." He was clearly in a bad mood. He was stressed, angry, and convinced that he was the most important person in the room. To him, everyone else was just background noise, people hired to serve him or stay out of his way. He walked fast, turning a corner near the elevators without slowing down. But at that same moment, another man was standing near a maintenance closet, checking a piece of paper in his hand. This man was very different from the CEO. He was wearing old gray work coveralls that had seen better days. There were stains of oil and grease on the fabric, and his boots were dusty and worn. His hands were rough, showing years of hard work, and his face was lined with tiredness. He looked like someone who spent his days fixing things, making sure the building actually worked while everyone else just enjoyed it. The CEO was moving too fast to pay attention to his surroundings. In a split second, he crashed right into the man in the dirty clothes. It wasn't a gentle bump. The CEO stumbled, and his phone nearly slipped out of his hand. He caught himself just in time, but his anger exploded instantly. He stopped dead in his tracks and turned to look at the person who dared to get in his way. The worker in the coveralls looked just as surprised. He reached out a hand to steady the CEO, a kind gesture to make sure the rich man didn't fall. "Whoa, careful there," the worker said gently. "I am so sorry, I didn't see you coming around the corner." But the CEO did not want an apology. He did not want kindness. He pulled his arm back as if the worker's touch was dirty, and he looked the older man up and down with pure disgust. He saw the grease on the man's hands and the stains on his clothes. In the CEO's mind, he didn't see a human being. He saw a janitor. He saw someone lower than him. He saw a problem. "Watch where you're going," the CEO snapped, his voice harsh and cutting. "Do you have any idea how busy I am? You people should stay in the service hallways. You don't belong in the main lobby where the residents are walking." The lobby went quiet for a moment. The security guards looked over, but they didn't intervene. The worker lowered his hand slowly, looking confused. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to explain that he wasn't just wandering around, that he was there for a specific reason. But the CEO didn't give him a chance. He was too full of his own importance to listen to a man in dirty clothes. "You're a disgrace to this building," the CEO continued, brushing off his suit as if he had touched something poisonous. "Look at this floor. You're tracking dust everywhere. Get out of my sight before I call your manager and have you fired." The CEO shook his head in annoyance, adjusted his expensive cufflinks, and marched toward the private elevators. He pressed the button repeatedly, as if pushing it harder would make the elevator arrive faster. When the doors finally opened, he stepped inside, still talking on his phone, acting as if the whole interaction was just a minor annoyance in his perfect day. The elevator doors slid shut, separating the two men into different worlds. Back in the lobby, the older man stood alone. He looked down at his dirty hands, then at the elevator doors closing. He didn't look angry, though. He just looked sad. A small sigh escaped his lips. He shook his head slowly, picked up his heavy toolbox, and turned back toward the maintenance door. He didn't say a word, but his silence spoke volumes. The CEO had judged him instantly, assuming he knew everything about the man based on his clothes. But the CEO had made a very big mistake. He had judged the wrong man, and he had no idea that his arrogant behavior was about to catch up with him in a way he never expected. High above the busy streets of Los Angeles, the air was much cooler and much fresher. This was the rooftop lounge of the Aurora Tower. It was a place where the city's richest people went to relax, drink expensive drinks, and talk about how much money they were making. The view was incredible. You could see for miles, looking down at the traffic and the tiny people walking below like ants. It made the people up there feel powerful, like they were standing on top of the world. The CEO was there, feeling better than he had all morning. The anger from the lobby incident had faded, replaced by a familiar sense of superiority. He was sitting at a sleek glass table with 3 other people investors who had flown in from New York just to meet him. They were dressed in sharp suits, nodding at everything the CEO said. The CEO held a glass of whiskey in one hand, using the other to make grand gestures as he spoke. He was in his element. He was telling them about his philosophy of business, about how he could spot talent from a mile away and how he had no patience for people who didn't work hard. "It's about vision," the CEO said, his voice loud and confident. "Most people don't have the stomach for success. They are lazy. They are unfocused. I built my company by cutting out the weak links. If you aren't perfect, you aren't useful to me." The investors laughed politely, sipping their drinks. They wanted his money, so they agreed with everything he said, but just a few yards away, hidden behind a large decorative wall of bushes and plants, the real work of the building was happening. The older man in the gray coveralls was crouching next to a massive silver air conditioning unit. This machine was the heart of the building's cooling system. It was a complicated beast of pipes and wires. The man was working intently, sweat dripping down his forehead and stinging his eyes. It was hard, hot labor. He wasn't wearing a suit or sipping expensive whiskey. He was fixing a valve that controlled the airflow to the penthouse suites. If he didn't fix it, the people in those luxury apartments would be very uncomfortable very soon. The man didn't care about the view or the fancy people nearby. He cared about doing the job right. He used a heavy wrench to tighten a bolt. Clang! The sound rang out, sharp and metallic. The CEO stopped talking. He frowned, looking around. The noise had interrupted his flow. He ignored it and continued his story. But a few minutes later, the man had to use a hammer to knock a rusted piece loose. Bang, bang, bang. The CEO's face turned a shade of red. He couldn't concentrate. He felt disrespected. How could he close a multi-million-dollar deal with all that noise? He stood up abruptly, excusing himself from the table with a tight, fake smile. "I'm sorry," he told the investors. "I need to see what is going on over there. The management here should know better than to allow construction noise during peak hours." He marched around the bush wall, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel. When he saw the older man, his frustration boiled over. It was the same bum from the lobby. The CEO couldn't believe it. First, the man blocked his path in the lobby, and now he was ruining a business meeting. "Hey!" the CEO shouted, not caring who heard him. "You, what do you think you are doing?" The worker looked up, squinting in the sunlight. He wiped his greasy hands on a rag. "I'm sorry for the noise, sir," he said politely. But the pressure valve was stuck. "I have to fix it before the system overheats. If I stop now, the whole floor might lose AC. I don't care about the AC." The CEO yelled, his voice echoing across the rooftop. "I care about my meeting. I am trying to talk to important people, and you are acting like a garbage collector out here." The worker's face fell. He stood up slowly, trying to explain. "Sir, with all due respect, I am the only one who knows how to service this unit. I was called in specifically." "Shut up," the CEO cut him off, pointing a finger in his face. "I don't want to hear your excuses. Look at you. You're a mess. You're dirty. You're loud. You don't belong in a place like this. This is for residents and guests. You look like you should be in a junkyard." By now, the investors had wandered over to see what the commotion was. A few waiters stopped serving drinks, watching in silence. Two security guards who had been stationed near the elevator started walking over. The CEO felt the eyes on him, and it fueled his ego. He wanted to show these investors that he was a man who took charge. He wanted to prove that he wouldn't let a nobody ruin his day. He stepped closer to the worker, getting right in his personal space. "You are ruining the ambiance," the CEO sneered, looking the older man up and down with disgust. "You are a disgrace. I want you off this roof, now." "Sir, I just need 10 more minutes to finish the seal," the worker said quietly. He sounded tired, not angry. "Then it will be silent." "I said get out," the CEO roared. He turned to the approaching security guards. "Get this guy out of here. He's trespassing and he's harassing the guests. Have him thrown out the back entrance." The security guards looked uncertain. They knew this man was working, but they also knew who the CEO was. They knew the CEO had a lot of pull with the building's owners. One of the guards gently grabbed the worker's arm. "Come on, sir. You have to leave." The worker didn't resist. He looked at his unfinished work, then at the red-faced CEO screaming at him. He saw the investors looking down their noses at him. He felt small, but he also felt a deep sense of disappointment in humanity. He let out a long breath and nodded slowly. "Okay," he said softly. "I will go." The CEO smirked, crossing his arms over his chest. He felt like he had won a great victory. He had protected his territory. "Good," he said as the guards led the worker toward the elevator. "And don't come back until you learn how to dress and act like a civilized human being." The crowd on the rooftop watched in silence. Some of them shifted uncomfortably, feeling that the CEO had gone too far. Others just looked away, not wanting to get involved. The CEO didn't notice their discomfort. He just straightened his tie and turned back to his guests. "Now," he said, his voice switching back to a charming business tone. "Where were we?" "Oh yes, we were talking about the importance of respect in the workplace." He had no idea that the elevator doors were about to open, and that his moment of triumph was about to become his biggest embarrassment. He had judged the man based on the dirt on his clothes, completely missing the value of the man inside. But the truth has a way of coming out, usually when you least expect it. The heavy silence that fell over the rooftop lounge was thick and uncomfortable. It wasn't the peaceful silence of a library. It was the awkward silence that happens when someone does something cruel and everyone sees it. The CAO was too busy puffing out his chest to notice it. He turned back to his glass table, picked up his whiskey, and swirled the amber liquid around. He thought he had just proven his dominance. He thought he had shown the investors that he was a strong leader who didn't let anyone disturb his business. But looking around, he noticed the investors weren't smiling anymore. They were looking past him, their eyes wide with curiosity and confusion. The CEO turned around to see what they were looking at. The private elevator at the far end of the roof, the one that only the most famous residents used, had just slid open. A man stepped out. He wasn't wearing a suit and tie like the CEO. He was dressed in simple clothes, a comfortable jacket, and boots. He looked relaxed, like he didn't have a care in the world. It was the famous actor Keanu Reeves. Keanu lived in the building, but he rarely made a scene. He usually kept to himself, riding his motorcycle and being polite to the staff. Today, he had come up to the roof just to enjoy the fresh air and maybe read a book for a while. But as soon as he stepped out, he felt the tension. It hit him like a wave. He saw the two security guards walking away with the older man in the dirty gray coveralls. The older man had his head down, looking defeated, holding his heavy toolbox by his side. Keanu saw the CEO standing in the middle of the lounge. Looking self-satisfied, Keanu didn't ignore it like most people would have. He didn't pretend he didn't see anything. He walked straight toward the commotion. He didn't walk like a movie star. He walked like a regular guy who wanted to know what was wrong. "Wait a second," Keanu said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was clear and firm. It carried across the roof. The security guard stopped. The CEO looked over, annoyed that his victory moment was being interrupted again. But when he saw who it was, his expression changed. He recognized Keanu immediately. A fake smile spread across the CEO's face. He was a fan of the movies, or at least he knew that being seen with a celebrity was good for his image. He straightened his jacket and stepped forward, extending a hand. "Mr. Reeves," the CEO said, his voice suddenly dripping with sweetness. "What a pleasure to see you here. I hope we didn't disturb you. We were just handling a small security issue. Nothing for you to worry about." Keanu ignored the outstretched hand. He walked right past the CEO as if he wasn't even there. He went directly to the security guards and the man in the coveralls. The guards looked nervous, shifting their weight from foot to foot. "Is there a problem here?" Keanu asked them. He looked at the older man, concern in his eyes. "Hey, are you okay?" The worker looked up, surprised. He wasn't used to famous people talking to him like he was a friend. "I'm all right," the worker said softly. "Just leaving. I was told to go." Keanu nodded. He turned to the security guards. "Why is he leaving? Is he causing trouble?" "No, sir," one guard said quietly, glancing at the CEO. "The CEO here asked us to remove him. He said the man was a nuisance." The CEO, sensing that things weren't going his way, stepped forward aggressively. He wanted to explain his side before Keanu got the wrong idea. "Look, Keanu," he said, trying to sound casual, dropping the Mr. Reeves to act like they were buddies. This guy was making a terrible noise. Hammering, banging. "I have a meeting." "He's just a worker." He was dirty and loud. "It's not appropriate for this setting." The CEO looked at the investors and laughed a little, expecting them to back him up. But they didn't say a word. They were watching Keanu. Keanu looked at the CEO. His face was serious. He didn't look impressed. "A worker?" Keanu asked. "You mean the man who keeps this building running?" "He's a janitor with a wrench," the CEO sneered, waving his hand dismissively. "I don't care what he does. He's in the way. I pay enough to live here that I shouldn't have to look at that." Keanu took a deep breath. He turned back to the older man. He didn't see a dirty janitor. He saw a neighbor. "How's the retrofit coming along, Elias?" Keanu asked, using the man's name. The whole rooftop seemed to lean in to listen. The CEO froze. The smirk fell off his face. The older man, Elias, stood up a little straighter. The defeat in his eyes faded, replaced by a gentle spark. "It's going okay, Keanu," he said. "It's a tricky system. The cooling unit is old. I was trying to fix the valve when the noise started. I just need about 10 more minutes to get it sealed. I'm sorry for the disturbance." Keanu smiled and reached out, patting Elias on the shoulder. "Don't apologize. I know you've been pulling double shifts to get the tower ready for the heat wave next week. Everyone in the building is counting on you. If that unit breaks, we all sweat." "I know," Elias said, wiping his hands on his rag again. "I take it seriously. I designed the system, after all. I know it better than anyone." The CEO's jaw dropped. It actually opened physically. He looked from Elias to Keanu and back to Elias. His brain was trying to process what he had just heard. "Designed the what?" The CEO stammered. "Wait, you said you designed it?" Keanu turned to face the CEO now. The friendly vibe was gone. Keanu was protective now. He stood between the angry CEO and the tired worker. "Yeah," Keanu said, his voice calm but cutting like a knife. "Elias isn't just some random worker you can push around. He's a retired architectural engineer. He's the consultant who designed the ecosystems for this entire tower." The investors gasped. One of them dropped his phone on the table with a thud. They knew the name. They knew the reputation. The Aurora Tower was famous for its green energy and its perfect air quality. It was the best in the city. And this dirty, grissy man in the old coveralls was the genius who built it. "He's also a resident," Keanu continued, looking the CEO right in the eyes. "He lives in the penthouse directly above yours. He owns 3 units in the building. He chooses to wear the coveralls because he likes to fix things with his own hands. He doesn't just sit around and complain about noise." The CEO felt his face burning hot. It was a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time, Shame. He looked at the grease on Elias's hands again, but now he didn't see dirt. He saw expertise. He looked at the toolbox and he realized it contained tools that cost more than his own suit. Keanu wasn't finished. You said he doesn't belong here? Actually, he belongs here more than any of us. Without him, this tower is just a glass box in the sun. You should be thanking him for working in the heat to keep you cool, not treating him like trash. The CEO opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could he say? He had insulted a legend in front of one of the most famous actors in the world, all while trying to look powerful in front of his investors. The reality of his mistake crashed down on him. He had judged the wrong man, and the price of his arrogance was about to be paid in full. Keanu signaled the security guards to let Elias go, and with a simple nod, he changed the entire story. The rooftop of the Aurora Tower felt incredibly small all of a sudden. It was strange how a place that usually felt so big and open could become suffocating in just a few seconds. The CEO stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, his expensive whiskey glass forgotten on the table. The words architectural engineer and penthouse resident were bouncing around inside his head, crashing into his pride. He looked at the man in the dirty coveralls again, really looked at him, but the image refused to change. The coveralls were still stained with grease. The boots were still dusty. But now, thanks to Keanu's words, the CEO saw a ghost of the past. A genius who had built the very ground they were standing on. The silence was broken by a quiet laugh. But it didn't come from Keanu or the worker. It came from one of the investors. He was a tall man with silver hair, usually very serious. He was looking at the CEO with a mix of amusement and pity. Wait a minute, the investor said, stepping closer to Elias. Are you the Elias? The one who wrote the papers on urban cooling systems 10 years ago? The system we tried to copy for our headquarters in New York? Elias nodded slowly, a humble smile touching his lips. Yes, that was me. I've been retired for a while, but I still consult on buildings that have trouble. This place, it's my favorite project. It's like a child to me. The investor's eyes lit up. He didn't even glance at the CEO anymore. He completely ignored the man he had flown across the country to meet. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his own business card, offering it to Elias with 2 hands, a sign of deep respect. I have read everything you've written. It is an honor to meet you. We have been having issues with our ventilation in Chicago. I would pay anything to have you look at it. The CEO felt a cold sweat forming on his forehead. This was his worst nightmare unfolding in slow motion. He watched the man he had called a vagrant just seconds ago being courted by one of the biggest investors in the country. The dynamic had flipped instantly. The CEO wasn't the king of the tower anymore. He was the outsider who didn't understand the value of the people around him. Panic started to set in. The CEO realized he had to fix this, and he had to fix it fast. He couldn't let these potential partners walk away thinking he was a bully who insulted legends. He needed to spin this. He needed to pretend it was all a misunderstanding. He took a deep breath, plastered a fake, shaky smile on his face, and stepped forward. Well? The CEO said, his voice a bit too high. This is certainly a surprise. I had no idea. Elias, my friend, you should have said something. I was just teasing you. Just having a little fun. Corporate humor, you know how it is. He reached out to pat Elias on the shoulder, trying to act like they were old buddies. But Keanu stepped in between them, blocking the CEO's hand. Keanu didn't look angry, but his eyes were hard. He wasn't buying the act. Neither was Elias. Elias shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. There wasn't much humor in it, sir, Elias said quietly. You told me I didn't belong here. You told the guards to throw me out. That didn't feel like a joke. The CEO's face turned a deep shade of red. It was a test. He lied desperately. I wanted to see how you handled pressure. For security purposes. You passed. You really passed. It was a pathetic lie, and everyone knew it. The other investors who had been standing back watching started to shake their heads. They weren't stupid. They had seen the arrogance in the CEO's eyes earlier. They had heard the cruelty in his voice. Now, seeing him try to weasel out of it just made him look weak. In the business world, confidence is key. A man who lies to save face is not a man you trust with your money. Keanu turned to the CEO, crossing his arms. You know, Keanu said, his voice calm but carrying a heavy weight. It's funny. You are up here trying to sell them on your vision. You want them to think you are a leader, but you just kicked out the only guy in this building who actually knows how things work. The CEO sputtered, I can hire anyone. I have money. I can get 1,000 engineers. But you can't buy experience, Keanu countered. And you can't buy class. Elias is here because he loves the building. You're just here because you can afford the rent. Do you know the difference between a house and a home? People like Elias make it a home. People like you just treat it like a hotel. The words stung the CEO more than any insult could have. He looked around and realized the table had turned completely. The investors were no longer looking at him with admiration. They were looking at him with disappointment. They were whispering to each other. One of them, a woman who had been silent the whole time, walked over to Keanu and Elias. She completely ignored the CEO. Mr. Reeves, she said, I think we've heard enough about the CEO's project. Honestly, I'm more interested in what Elias is doing with the new retrofit. If this building's efficiency is as good as they say, maybe my firm should be investing in the technology, not the management. It was a knockout punch. The CEO stood there, holding his empty glass, his knuckles white. He was being fired, not from a job, but from the respect of his peers. He was being erased from the conversation. The irony was bitter. He had judged Elias based on his dirty clothes, thinking that appearance equated to worth. Now, his expensive suit was doing nothing to save him. His appearance meant nothing without the character to back it up. Elias looked at the CEO one last time. There was no anger in his gaze, just a calm, tired sadness. You know, Elias said softly, the valve I was fixing? It controls the air to your unit. It was overpressurizing. It could have been dangerous. I was trying to protect you, even while you were yelling at me. That's my job? I protect the people inside, even the ones who don't appreciate it. With that, Elias picked up his toolbox. The weight of it seemed light in his hands now. He nodded at Keanu. I'm going to finish the job, Keanu. Thanks for the help. Go ahead, Elias, Keanu said with a warm smile. I'll watch your back. The CEO watched Elias walk back toward the AC unit, the investors following him like he was the new leader. He was left standing alone near the edge of the roof, the wind messing up his perfectly gelled hair. He tried to say something else to assert his authority, but his voice caught in his throat. For the first time in years, he had nothing to say. He realized that he hadn't just been rude to a stranger. He had shown his true colors to the people he wanted to impress most. And in doing so, he had lost everything. The wind on the rooftop seemed to get colder, but the CEO felt a hot rush of blood in his cheeks. He stood there, alone in his expensive suit, watching the scene unfold in front of him like a movie he wasn't invited to be in. The investors, the same people who had been hanging on his every word just 20 minutes ago, were now completely ignoring him. They had formed a semicircle around Elias, nodding eagerly as he pointed at the machinery and explained the technical details of the cooling system. They were treating the man in the dirty coveralls with more respect than they had ever shown the CEO. The CEO felt a strange sensation in his chest. It was a tight, heavy feeling that he hadn't felt in a long time. It was shame. For years he had built a wall around himself with his money and his title. He told himself that people who didn't have his success didn't deserve his time. He believed that looking down on others was a privilege of the wealthy. But looking at Elias's calm, dignified face, the CEO realized how fragile his own ego really was. He had spent a lifetime trying to prove he was better than everyone else, but in just 5 minutes, an old man with grease on his hands had proven that character was worth more than a bank account. He knew he couldn't just walk away and pretend this didn't happen. If he left now, the investors would destroy his reputation in the city. They would tell everyone that he was a bully, a man who didn't understand the value of people. His business would suffer. He had to do something to fix this, even if it felt like swallowing broken glass. He had to swallow his pride. Taking a deep breath to steady his shaking hands, the CEO walked slowly toward the small group. The investors stopped talking as he approached, their expressions guarded. Keanu was standing next to Elias, holding a bottle of water. He looked at the CEO, his eyes unreadable, waiting to see what would happen next. The CEO stopped a few feet away from Elias. He couldn't look him in the eye at first, so he focused on the metal toolbox. The CEO started, his voice sounding weak and small, nothing like the booming shout he had used earlier. He cleared his throat and tried again. I owe you an apology. Elias stopped wiping his hands and looked up. He didn't look angry. He just looked tired, but he was listening. I was incredibly rude to you, the CEO continued, the words stumbling out. I judged you by your clothes. I judged you by the job I thought you had. I treated you like you were beneath me, and I was wrong. I made a terrible mistake. I thought I was the most important person on this roof, but I was just the loudest. The rooftop was silent. The air conditioning unit hummed in the background. The investors watched silently. The CEO forced himself to look Elias in the eyes. You were just trying to help everyone in this building, including me. You were doing your job, and I humiliated you for it. There is no excuse for my behavior. I am sorry. Elias let the silence hang there for a moment, not to punish the CEO, but to let the words sink in. Finally, Elias spoke. We all make mistakes, he said softly. I have made plenty in my life. But you have to ask yourself something. If I had been wearing a suit like yours, would you have yelled at me? Or did you yell at me because you thought I was someone you could push around? The CEO felt the truth of those words hit him like a physical blow. He knew the answer. He knew he never would have shouted at a man in a suit. You're right, the CEO admitted, his voice barely a whisper. I saw your clothes and I made an assumption. I thought I was better than you. I was wrong. The suit doesn't make the man, Elias said gently. Integrity makes the man? Kindness makes the man. I fix machines because I like solving problems. You tried to solve a problem today by being cruel. That isn't leadership. That is just fear. You were afraid that if you were nice to a worker, you would look weak. But true strength is being kind to people who can do nothing for you. Keanu stepped forward then. He handed the bottle of water to Elias and then turned to the CEO. Keanu didn't look angry anymore, just serious. He's right, Keanu said. You have a lot of money, and that's great. It gives you freedom. But you are poor in the things that actually count. You need to fix that. Go home, think about this, and try to be better next time. That's all anyone can ask. The CEO nodded slowly. He felt a lump in his throat, a strange mix of embarrassment and relief. He didn't have his deal with the investors. He could see that opportunity was gone. But he felt like he had learned something more valuable than a contract. Thank you, the CEO said quietly to Elias. For the lesson, and for fixing the air. Elias gave him a small, tired smile. Go on now. I have work to finish. The CEO didn't look at the investors. He knew he had lost them. He turned and walked toward the elevator. His steps were slower now, less aggressive and arrogant. He didn't stomp. He walked like a regular person. As he waited for the elevator doors to open, he looked back one last time. He saw Keanu laughing at something Elias said, and he saw Elias picking up his wrench to get back to work. They looked happy, despite the noise and the heat. They looked like real people, enjoying a connection that money couldn't buy. The elevator ride down felt like the longest ride of his life. He watched the numbers light up as he descended from the clouds back to the street. When the doors finally opened, he was back in the lobby where it all started. The floor was just as shiny as before, the flowers just as expensive, but the building felt different to him now. It didn't feel like a trophy he had won. It felt like a place where people lived and worked, a community he had tried to ruin with his ego. He walked toward the exit, his heels clicking on the marble. Near the door, he saw a young janitor mopping up a spill. The old CEO would have complained about the floor being wet or the janitor being in the way. The old CEO would have seen a problem, but this time, the CEO stopped. He looked at the young man, who looked nervous as the CEO approached. The CEO smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes for the first time in years. "Good morning," the CEO said. "You're doing a great job keeping this place clean. Thank you for your hard work." The young janitor blinked in surprise, his face lighting up. "Thank you, sir. Have a wonderful day." The CEO walked out of the Aurora Tower and into the bright Los Angeles sun. He had lost the deal, and he had lost his pride. But as he walked down the street, he realized he had gained something worth much more. He realized that the wrong man wasn't the one in the elevator with Keanu Reeves. The wrong man was the one in the mirror, and finally, that man was ready to change.